All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our afternoon plenary session. My name's Rosanna D'Antonio. I'm an executive director with NV5, and I'm a former deputy director with Los Angeles County Public Works. I led our emergency management business line, so this is Geo-Extreme is right up my alley. I'm also a past director of the ASCE Board of Directors, and I'm excited to announce that I'm also a candidate for ASCE's president-elect for the 2026 election cycle, so be on the lookout for that. But more importantly, today, I'm very excited to be moderating along with my colleague, Nasli Yesler. We're excited to be moderating this afternoon's program, which is titled LA Fires, the New Normal. When Daniel asked me if I wanted to assist in coming up with a panel of speakers, I just knew exactly who I wanted to tap into. I knew exactly who I wanted to be here today, and fortunately, they were all available and they all said yes, so you're in for a treat. We have three very dynamic speakers today. This is a 90-minute session. Our speakers actually, interestingly, asked that they wanted to limit their presentations to 15 to 20 minutes. Now, I don't know about you, but in my experience, speakers normally ask for more time and not less time. So you are all given the gift of time. They wanted to make sure that you had plenty of time to ask questions. And so if you have any questions, please jot them down. We will get to them at the end of all three presentations. I'm going to be introducing each one of them prior to them coming up, and then again, we'll sit and we'll have an opportunity to enter into our Q&A. So let's get started. So on the week of January 6, 2025, several wildfires broke out in Los Angeles County. There were actually 7 wildfires that broke out. We tend to forget that. We focus on the big ones that continued to rage on for 3 weeks. But those 7 fires, when they broke out, if you looked at a map, they all kind of surrounded the city of Los Angeles. And for a moment there, it kind of felt like we were under attack. Although most of the fires were contained fairly quickly, Palisades and Eaton Fires continued to rage for over 3 weeks. Now, we've learned a lot since January. We've since learned that although some of these fires were caused by human-made conditions, they were definitely fueled by extreme weather conditions. And they've exposed resiliency gaps, huge resiliency gaps in our infrastructure and in our communities. And our speakers will discuss the wildfire's aftermath, the need to rebuild with resilience, the legislative fallout, and preparing for the new normal. So, to kick us off, we have our very first speaker, Fire Chief Chris Nigg. Chris is an accomplished fire service leader with more than 24 years of progressive experience in emergency services. He currently serves as Fire Chief of the Laverne Fire Department, where he has spearheaded modernization efforts in wildfire response, community risk reduction, and regional collaboration. His leadership has driven measurable improvements in response time, community risk reduction, workforce development, mutual aid integration, and data-driven deployment. In addition to his operational leadership, Chief Nigg is a published professional with his recent op-ed in Western City Magazine highlighting evolving challenges and policy needs facing the fire service. Please help me welcome Fire Chief Chris Nigg.
Alrighty, it looks like our AV's up and running. Hey, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'll start this one just like I did last time I spoke to maybe some of you in this audience. I did not have on my bingo card presenting to a civil engineer group because that is certainly not something I regularly do. Like Rosanna said, my name is Chris Nigg, Fire Chief for the City of Laverne in Los Angeles County. Although these fires didn't directly touch my community, we did have actually the bridge fire that got really close to our community and presented a lot of concern at the time. But I am also good colleagues and friends with the fire chiefs that dealt directly with those fires, and within our broader group, LAFCA group, Los Angeles Area Fire Chiefs, we've had a lot of discussion and a lot of good learning from these fires. So it's an honor to join you here at this Geo-Extreme event for this critically important session. The fires have obviously highlighted a lot of gaps in not only our response, but also our recovery. And it's important to me to not only be involved here at the LA County level, but up and down the state level. With that, a lot of the logos you see down here, I am the immediate past president for the League of Cities Fire Chiefs, the up-and-coming president for the LA Area Fire Chiefs, and then also a legislative director for the California Fire Chiefs Association. So with that, I do my best to help steer broader statewide legislation to address a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about today. What we experienced in early January of 25 is not a one-off aberration. It's a clear warning about how our wildfire risk, infrastructure, community design, and climate pressures are converging. Today, I'll walk you through what happened in those fires, how and why the infrastructure and systems failed, what we've learned, and what must change if we expect communities to survive the next event. It works. All right, let's begin by anchoring the scale of the event and what the new normal means in practice. Early January of 25, a string of wildfires ignited across LA County under extreme weather conditions. Between January 7th and January 31st, more than 55,000 acres burned in the area. Two of the largest fires, the Palisades Fire and the Eaton Fire alone consumed over 23,000 acres and more than 14,000 acres respectively. Let me be clear, from an acre standpoint, that's not extraordinarily large, to be quite honest with you. The structural toll was staggering. More than 16,000 homes and other structures destroyed or damaged in what are now ranked among California's most destructive wildfires. In addition, evacuation orders and warnings impacted more than 100,000 residents, with peak evacuations estimated at 200,000 plus. The human toll goes farther. A recent peer-reviewed study estimates approximately 440 excess deaths attributable to the January fires when considering indirect effects such as smoke exposure and healthcare disruption, which I know will be talked about later on today as well. The housing and economic implications are also enormous, and thousands that are displaced, entire neighborhoods leveled, and insurance. Rebuilding and rental markets are also under a massive strain. A recent report estimated by property damages between 28 billion and 54 billion, with significant business disruption and job loss over the next 5 years. Sorry about that. What makes this so significant is that these fires started in winter and in areas not generally built or planned for extreme wildfire behavior. They're not the exception, they're now part of the rule. In short, the fire season is gone. The fire year is here, and what's more, the mix of vegetation, climate stress, fuel accumulation, and built environment vulnerabilities means each ignition has a potential for infrastructural collapse, community displacement, and long-term trauma. January's fires made it clear this was not a forest fire. This was an urban wildfire in full effect. Some of you may be familiar with the term WUI, which we use universally in the California Fire Service now. It stands for Wildland Urban Interface, which is what I'm talking about. Homes right next to wildland, dense neighborhoods built for lower risk profiles, infrastructure not hardened for flame front ignition under ember storms. Response challenges included evacuation routes compromised when roads burned or power went out, fire crews delayed or destroyed access corridors and smoke-choked neighborhoods, critical infrastructure failure, power lines down, communication knocked out, and water systems under stress. Embers traveled across highways, igniting homes blocks away. We'll see ember storms going miles away, frankly, depending on the winds. Fire agencies found themselves not just fighting fires, but fighting failing systems. The result, firefighter crews, mutual aid deployments, community evacuation, and lifeline systems were operating in uncharted territory. We regularly invest in defensible space, vegetation programs, homeowner education, and these absolutely matter. They do, in fact, save homes, and they also reduce risk. But January exposed their limits. A single home with untreated vents, combustible siding, or decking can ignite its neighbor and then a row of homes. Defensible space doesn't stop embers or radiant heat jump between closely spaced structures. Many homes were built under older standards, not designed for modern ember storms. Prevention programs often assume seasonal patterns. These fires ignored that. In short, prevention is still necessary, but no longer sufficient. These wildfire environments have changed our built environments and systems, and they must be consistent with that change. If we expect better outcomes, we must build differently. The January fires showed clearly, homes built with ignition-resistant materials survive. Those built to historic standards don't. But building differently means policy, code, land use, and infrastructure must align. In 2025, California enacted a slew of major reforms. I'll touch on just a couple here right now. Senate Bill 326 established a statewide wildfire risk mitigation planning framework requiring baseline and forecast reports that tie infrastructure, land use, and hazard planning wildfire risk. Senate Bill 629 updates fire hazard severity zone mapping to include areas with repeated urban wildfire spread, different from the maps that currently just take into account simply wildland. Perhaps the most critical is the acceleration of Zone 0 regulations. Show of hands, anybody familiar with Zone 0? Heard about it coming down the pipe? Oh, wow. Okay. Zone 0 requires a non-combustible, ember-resistant zone within 0 to 5 feet of every structure in the very high fire hazard severity zones. Another show of hands. Who's familiar with the State Fire Marshal fire hazard severity maps? Okay. Let me give you some context on those. The State Fire Marshal, they're supposed to update them by law every 7 years. The last maps, I think, came out in 2007. They just released the ones this year for state responsibility area and local responsibility area. Those maps are done off of a scientific methodology, and it is intended to articulate hazard, not necessarily risk per se from an insurance perspective. The insurance rates have been a big topic of conversation over the last several years, and we're confused with these maps. These maps are important because they do, in fact, have major implications in building code, fire code, et cetera. So this Zone 0 that's on its way down the pipe right now will be different from those maps because in the past our defensible space zones required 0 to 30, 0 to 50, 0 to 100 feet defensible space. Now they require 0 to 5 feet. Meaning nothing combustible within 5 feet of a home in these wild, high fire hazard areas. As you can imagine, the politics behind that are extraordinary. This fundamentally shifts the defensible space model from yards to foundations. Land use planning must integrate fire modeling into zoning the same way we integrate flood, seismic, and storm hazards. If we keep building neighborhoods in the same way with the same materials, we will continue to lose them in the same way. Defensible space only works at scale. It's not enough if one house complies and the next does not. In January, we saw how quickly non-compliance can compromise whole streets. So we must enforce, support, and assist. Some of these new practices include digital and aerial inspections tied to parcel data, compliance programs that offer assistance, especially for seniors and low-income households, community-wide enforcement strategies rather than individual property focus, landscaping, home ignition, zone management, hardening materials, all wrapped into defensible space. Resilience can't be voluntary in a high-hazard urban wildland interface. It must be built, reinforced, and supported. This does go beyond our roles as builders, planners, and enforcement. It also requires community involvement, engagement. So post-recovery. Having the fire go out doesn't mean the disaster is over. In fact, far from over. After January, we faced hazardous debris removal, one of the largest wildfire hazardous material cleanups in US history recently. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Displaced families in mass care shelters for weeks or even months, quite possibly even still to this day. Major utility outages, water, power, communications, environmental health impacts, air quality degradation, soil and water contamination, slow rebuilding, permitting delays, utility restarts, insurance disputes, shortage of housing and stock. If we don't plan recovery before the fire, the recovery will drag on, costs will escalate, and community resilience is ultimately lost. No single agency can solve this. Engineers design our lifelines, planners decide where we build, utilities manage ignition and continuity. Fire agencies respond and recover, policy frames incentivize and hold accountable. When each of these actors works in isolation, we continue to build vulnerability. When they work in concert, we build resilience. We need integrated planning, fire science that's woven into engineering design, land use, infrastructure investment, and emergency operations. I will tell you from personal experience, prior to becoming a fire chief, I was a fire marshal at a previous agency, and it was a huge learning curve for me when I was working with developers and planners and engineers to get people to understand our world. The fire service, I like to tell people, is always an uphill battle because everything we do and all that we cost is always just in case something happens. So that's something that's always sitting in the back of our minds, because again, it's a lot of work, it requires a lot of energy, and it costs a lot of money. So I would encourage all of you, as you're moving through the building of the infrastructure in your various areas, to be engaging your public safety experts and ensuring that you are hearing them through. As we saw in one scenario during the Palisades fire, moving cars with bulldozers. There was legislation out there several years ago that forced communities to evaluate all of the areas in the high fire hazard areas that had one means of ingress and egress, but then it stopped there. Because I remember at the time when I was the fire marshal, I thought, great, we've identified this, and now what? And to this day, there's still no legislation that does anything about that. So these are the things that are very important to remember. All right, January 25 didn't surprise us. The warning signs were everywhere. What surprised us was how quickly systems buckled. The next time conditions align, if we respond in the same way, expect the same outcome. The path ahead is clear. Mitigation must lead, not follow disaster. Proactive, not reactive. Homeowners, communities, and jurisdictions must invest in survival and not just rebuild. Infrastructure must be designed for fire, not just historic risk, based off of previous fire behavior and fire modeling, because as we've seen, the fire behavior is not what it used to be. Recovery funding must reward resilient rebuilding, not reconstruction of vulnerability. The next Palisades or Eaton fire is inevitable. I believe catastrophe doesn't have to be. So with that, we're going to hold off on any questions or discussion. There's my QR code if anybody has any follow-up questions or wants to reach out to me later. I do thank you guys for your time and leadership in this resilient space. Fire agencies cannot respond their way out of this problem alone, but together with engineering, planning, utilities, operations, and policy, we can design outcomes that communities survive. The fire service is very good at what it does, but we are finite, and we can't be everywhere all at once. And when you have embers pushing 80, 100 mile an hour 5 miles in front of us, there's physically no way for us to get a hold of that, especially when we don't even have aircraft. And all of those stars aligned during those fires, and that's exactly what happened. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. You touched on several different things. When we talk about resilience, we're not just talking about all of us here as professionals. Resilience trickles all the way down to the individual homeowners, and that's another area of a lack of resilience that we have seen. Our next speaker will give us a geotechnical perspective on the Palisades and Eaton fires, given the fact that we are in a geotechnical conference. William Mann is an Assistant Deputy Director with Los Angeles County Public Works with over 18 years of service. He oversees the Geotechnical and Materials Engineering Division, which provides geotechnical engineering, engineering geology, and environmental services to support the design, construction, and maintenance of a wide range of public works infrastructure. In addition to his public service with Los Angeles County Public Works, he has served on the city council of his hometown, Temple City, since 2015, including 2 terms as mayor. He enjoys working at the intersection of policymaking and engineering to find practical solutions to challenges facing the community. Please help me welcome William Mann.
Thank you, Rosanna, for this opportunity to be a part of this panel. First of all, I really appreciate Chris's perspective, and the fact that he went first kind of saves me a bit of time in terms of setting the background for what we're about to discuss. And so my goal of today's presentation is really just to give you a bit of an insight as to what the LA County Geotechnical team actually does and put it in the context of the Eaton and Palisades fire. Because I suspect that if any of you have worked with us over at LA County Public Works, you probably only encountered us through the permit review process where we're reviewing your geotechnical reports and plans. And so that's a very different realm than what the team also does, which is a lot of what you as geotechnical professionals do for your clients, which is not just emergency response, but design geotechnical investigations for infrastructure. So also to give you a little bit of background, I'm blessed to have a very diverse team of engineering geologists, geotechnical engineers, and technicians. And they work their butts off after the fires. And so to me, this is a bit of a tribute to the work that they really pulled. Because sometimes, as many of you know, us in the geotechnical professionals, we offer a lot of support, but sometimes our narrative tends to go untold. We're kind of maybe overshadowed by some of our other peers. So really one of the first immediate tasks that we as Public Works was called out to do in the aftermath of the fires was to conduct and evaluate whether there was a lot of significant or readily apparent damage for a lot of the structures in both the Eaton and Palisades fires. So fortunately, as an organization, we had a lot of mostly engineers that were certified and trained through the California Safety Assessment Program. We call it the SAP program. And to give you a context as to what we were dealing with, just in the Eaton fire alone, we now know that there were over 9,000 structures that were either burned, destroyed, or impacted. And so after LA County Fire had given us the go-ahead to enter the evacuation zone, we had the unenviable task of making sure we did all of this in a very short time span. This map here is a GIS layer that we started populating as we were going through the neighborhoods, and the red dots are the homes that were completely destroyed. And the black dots were the homes that were untouched, and everything that's green, yellow, and orange is everything in between. And so if anything, this map just kind of gives you an idea of the sheer order of the devastation that we were encountering. And also, we did the entire Eaton Altadena community in the span of 3 days. So everything was either red, yellow, or green tagged. And just to put some numbers for perspective, in the Eaton fire, there were nearly 6,500 residential units red tagged, almost 300 residential units yellow tagged, 110 commercial units red tagged, 33 commercial units yellow tagged. And then you kind of contrast that with the Palisades fire, where there's a lot less, but nevertheless the devastation was equally great. Now, the SAP evaluators, what they did really assisted property owners, homeowners, in the next step of the process that Chris also touched upon, which was the removal of the fire debris. And this created an immense logistical challenge that involved many different agencies. So as you probably have already heard, the Army Corps of Engineers really took the reins on the fire debris removal on a large scale. And I will just, for the purposes of this presentation, I just want to share with you one part of the collaboration that our team had with the Army Corps, which was specific to the properties affected along Pacific Coast Highway. In this particular area, there were over 180 properties that were along the shoreline. And the Army Corps contractor's job was to go parcel by parcel for homeowners that allowed them entry. So the property owners themselves had to first opt in to the Army Corps' offer, or for some homeowners, they opted out, which in that case, they would have had to hire their own contractors to perform the debris removal. Now, in this particular task, we formed teams of geotechnical and structural engineers and engineering geologists that literally went house by house. And their goal was to stay ahead of the Army Corps' progress and make an assessment as to whether or not there are any safety hazards for the contractors that were about to work on the site. And so as you can imagine, working along the coast, there were many different issues to take into consideration. In this particular picture, you can see that a lot of these homes were built many, many decades ago. And what became really apparent was, over the years, these homes actually served as a seawall barrier of sorts against wave erosion action. So in this picture, you can see the structure is no longer there, but the wave erosion has started eating away at the shoulder embankment of Pacific Coast Highway. And so that became a concern for Caltrans, because for obvious reasons, PCH is a main artery for utilities, contractors, first responders, et cetera, to be able to access the Malibu community. And so that was one of the most glaring issues that was apparent in the aftermath. In this picture, this is an example of a home that was partially burned. The tarped area where you see the plastic sheeting actually represents a void that our engineers and geologists found as they were evaluating this property. Just outside of the frame of this picture is the shoulder of PCH. And so this was an example of an issue that our teams flagged ahead of the contractors to ensure that, one, they had the proper equipment to be able to access and clear the debris. We didn't want them to locate any heavy equipment on areas where there may be a potential voids underneath. And given the sheer amount of damage that occurred along this area, it was very difficult to visually assess these accurately. So there was a lot of caution taken for the contractors. So they had all kinds of equipment, from long-range excavators, in order to make sure that they were doing this in a safe manner. And so the fire debris removal, really led to kind of the next question, which is, well, how do we go about rebuilding? And I know Chris touched on that in terms of, we typically see that as the planner's purview, but in the case of public works, and especially in the geotechnical perspective, one of the most interesting questions we had to grapple with was, how exactly would we go about doing this? And the geologic hazards that we deal with in the Santa Monica Mountains, in the Palisades area, is going to be very different than the hazards we're dealing with in Altadena. And so for a lot of you, you're wondering, well, Altadena is relatively flat except for maybe the foothill area, so what kind of hazards are you really talking about? And so one of the interesting curveballs that landed in our lap was the California Geologic Survey updated the preliminary quadrangle map for their Alquist Priolo earthquake fault zones in the middle of all this discussion. And so these fault zones, although to my geologists, this was nothing new. This was information that we had at a local level from having reviewed a lot of investigations along this area. But the map kind of threw a curveball for the general community at large, because a lot of people didn't really understood what this meant. They said, well, does this mean that I cannot rebuild because now I'm in a zone that's being flagged by the state? So our approach was we kind of tried to get ahead of this. We kind of knew it was coming. So we had a large inventory of properties both in the Altadena and the Palisades impacted communities. And we started flagging specific areas that might be of a geotechnical or geologic concern. All in all, to this date, we have not received a single application for rebuild where we've actually asked someone to perform a fault investigation study. And a lot of this just has to do with the fact that we have a lot of local data to be able to rule out or basically provide evidence that there's an absence of a fault trace within the Sierra Madre zone. Nevertheless, it was a messaging effort to really help people understand what the requirements were. Another interesting kind of intricacy or complexity behind this is, for a lot of folks that were dealing with rebuilding, the first department that they encounter is regional planning over at LA County. And regional planning had a policy that allowed like-for-like rebuild reconstruction as long as you were within 110% of the footprint of your original home. And there were other conditions and caveats as well. The problem was that didn't necessarily represent the engineering definition for like reconstruction. And so case in point, if you look at the Santa Monicas, one of the things we deal with all the time from a review standpoint is landslides, superficial instabilities, debris flows, and all sorts of geotechnical hazards that are outside of what the fault maps were really delineating. So there was a bit of a confusion from your average homeowner and even some consultants as to, well, what was being required and what wasn't. And really the answer is it's site specific, right? So I think that's the answer we like giving our clients as well. You know, what's the design parameter for a pile? Well, it depends on your site, right? So that wasn't an answer that a lot of people liked. They thought that, you know, rebuild meant that there was this convenient blanket template that you could just apply to everything without realizing that there are site-specific hazards that we were looking for. I will mention two other things that impacted the review process. From the County Board of Supervisors, there was a motion to create a one-stop center where all the county departments were housed in one area. So for anyone who was seeking to rebuild, they can go to one area and be able to talk to multiple departments at the same time to understand the requirements. There was also a board motion to waive fees for those who were rebuilding and were owner-occupied rebuilds at the time of the fire. And of course, you know, from the internal perspective, just because you waive fees doesn't mean that the cost goes away. It just means that we have to find a way to make the department whole elsewhere. So these are some of the pressures that we were dealing with as we were working through this. And then lastly, one of the things that we're looking forward to is the question of, you know, fault investigations, right? For those of you familiar with the Alquist-Priolo Act, the state actually exempts single-family homes from fault investigations. And for some of you that work within the city of Los Angeles jurisdiction, you might see the same requirement. But you look at LA County Building Code, for those of you familiar, in section 113, we actually require fault investigations for any structure intended for human occupancy. So there were a lot of questions as to, well, why? You know, why is this being brought up? And I'll give you the short version. In the upcoming 2026 code amendment, there will be provisions that allow the building official to waive the fault investigation requirement specifically for the areas impacted by the Eaton fire. So that's something coming just around the corner. I mentioned mud flow, debris flow. This was something that we as Public Works offered as a service to a lot of homeowners. In the aftermath of the fires, there were rains coming. And of course, the worst thing that could happen is if you somehow miraculously survived the fire, you didn't want your home to be damaged or obliterated by the impending mud flow, debris flow that was going to come down from the burn scars. So part of the Public Works team went out to the foothill communities. We have zones and areas that have been evaluated and known for a high, you know, potential for debris flows. We went door to door, offered homeowners free advice if they were willing to allow us on their property. And of course, this is very quick. This is not like a fully engineered solution. These are things based on the topography of your backyard, whether you had existing engineered devices that could help mitigate some of the mud flow, debris flow. I know a lot of fire stations were handing out sandbags, but a lot of people get sandbags, but they don't know where to place them, right? So this was part of our effort to try to bring the engineering to the doorsteps of our community. But of course, there's only so much you can do, right? And inevitably, some of these homes did suffer damage. These are pictures of homes right up against the foothills in the aftermath of the fires and the rains. And there was a lot of cleanup work that they had to do. And speaking of debris, one of the things that Public Works manages is we own and maintain a lot of debris basins across the mountains. And we knew the rains were coming. And so all of a sudden we had this very short timeline as to how can we clear out enough volume within our debris basins to ensure that we had enough capacity to capture all of the mud flow and debris flow that was coming down. So my team played a big role in the environmental testing of the soil and the dirt that was going to be cleaned out and carried off to various disposal sites. And so one of the concerns that came up really quickly was that each receiving site started having their own different testing criteria. And so it became a huge logistical challenge to not only determine where does the soil go, but what testing requirements are needed for that particular receiving site. And so for those of you following the news, there were also concerns from homeowners about, well, what are there potentially toxic substances in these materials that you're hauling? And so these were all legitimate, questions, but as I was joking with Rosanna and Chris earlier, we also had a lot of people who became chemistry experts overnight through ChatGPT. And so there were a lot of people questioning and asking, well, is that really the standards for testing? Where are your sources? Can we really trust you to do this kind of work? And this is where the interagency collaboration really came to play. A big shout out to the Department of Toxic Substances and Controls Department at the state level for really coming in and helping us with the messaging, letting the communities know that, hey, these are what the threshold standards are. This is what a background level of lead or arsenic actually means, and explaining some of the things that maybe we as professionals take for granted. So I guess one of the key lessons learned was we cannot underestimate the value of community outreach and the messaging, right? Translating the difficult technical language that we speak into something that our communities understand easily. So in this particular, this is Eaton Canyon. Right after the rains, this is what it looked like. It nearly filled up. In fact, some of our basins were at spillway. And we had two rainstorms, right? One in mid-February, another in March. And so in between the two rains, there was a massive effort to, again, clean this out to ensure that the next rain would have enough capacity for the next storm. Here's a picture of, you might not be able to see some of our crews there are trying to locate a plugged up inlet tower that was preventing the basin from draining. So this is just gives you a sense of the immediate aftermath of what we have to do to ensure that these things don't spill over and start impacting the communities that are downstream of a lot of our of the watershed that's being impacted. And of course, if we look further down, there is actually a lot of work that we did was related to environmental testing for water quality, especially along the beaches. So for example, in this picture, this is Las Flores Creek as it enters into the Pacific Ocean. There were some beaches that had deposits on the materials that became alarming to the residents. And so part of our team's work was to go out, sample, test, and ensure that the levels were within acceptable public health standards. And so again, the messaging was very important, how we communicated that to the community. And lastly, I want to touch upon something that Chris brought up that was really important, which was accessibility, especially in the aftermath of a fire. Both Lincoln Avenue in Altadena and Gorge Road Bridge up in the Santa Monicas were bridges that burned down. And in the case of Gorge Road, it's actually one of few single access points into certain communities up in the Santa Monicas. And so it became really urgent to find ways to restore access to our communities. So part of what I'm proud of our geotechnical team is being able to be a part of not just the response, but the design and construction of many key pieces of infrastructure that ensure that our first responders have the means of reaching our communities during the next disaster. And so with that, I just want to end on a note by saying we as geotechnical professionals touch so many aspects of our infrastructure. And for me, this is more of not just a tribute to my team, but a tribute to all of you here in the audience that I think we understand the value of the work that we provide to not just our clients, but our communities. But it's to emphasize that, a lot of people think of us as, geotechnical being a very niche field, but I always like to highlight the fact that we are very capable of doing many, many different kind of things. In fact, we touch nearly every single aspect of infrastructure in this entire world. So a shout out to all the geotechnical professionals in the room, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thanks, William. It's obvious you have a full plate on you, and having grown up in public works, it's hard not to feel proud of the work that you guys are doing. Okay, following any disaster, whether it be human-made or natural disaster, we as individuals tend to look to government for help. And now our next speaker will discuss whether government is really ready to govern. Our final speaker is Zev Yaroslavsky. You may have heard of him before. He's been at the forefront of Los Angeles County's biggest issues, including transportation, the environment, healthcare, and cultural arts. Zev is a former Los Angeles City Councilman for the 5th District and former supervisor on the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors representing the 3rd District. In fact, that's how I know him. He was one of 5 very powerful super bosses for me and for Public Works. He is now the director of the Los Angeles Initiative at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs and the Department of History, focusing on the intersection of policy, politics, and history of the Los Angeles region. His best-selling memoir, Zev's Los Angeles, From Boyle Heights to the Halls of Power, was published in 2023. Please help me welcome Zev Yaroslavsky.
Well, thank you very much, Rosanna. I'm not technical, I'm not geo, but I do want to commend all of you who are in this field, and I want to especially cite and give a shout out to the LA County Department of Public Works, which I had the privilege of working with, and I say with because they are the best in the business. I know there are other people here in the business, but I'm biased. And the LA County Department of Public Works is really a fantastic organization, a jack of all trades for all disasters. I mean, we are the disaster capital of the world, and we have some really good disaster response teams. I won't take as much time as the other 2 speakers have taken. I want to bifurcate it into 2 sections. One is I want to give you one of the things I do since I left office is an annual survey that we do countywide in Los Angeles about the quality of life. And one of the things we do is we ask topical questions every year. This year it was late February, early March, just 6 weeks after the fire. We asked a number of questions about how the fire impacted the county writ large, not just the people who lost their homes or who had members of their family killed in the fire. Not to diminish that. Those were the people who really paid the price. But how big was the footprint of the fire's impact? And that's what I want to do first. And then I want to talk a little bit about governance. So let's see if I can do this. All right, so, here they are, it's right in front of me. The survey we do is a sample of about 1,600 people countywide, 1,600 adults. There are 7.7 million adults who live in Los Angeles County. There has not been as much attention given, or there hadn't been as much attention given to the people beyond the immediate footprint of the fire until this survey came out, and it was quite stunning. Questions we wanted to ask and get answered if we could was, were county residents impacted by the fires beyond the fire footprint? And if so, how and to what extent? Our findings, as I said, were somewhat jaw-dropping, and I hope they'll provide you with a kind of idea of how these disasters work, especially fires. The wildfires that raged in Altadena and Pacific Palisades, and those weren't, as you heard, the only 2 places, they weren't the only 2 places where the fires were burning, were the story of our survey this year. Although the primary victims were clearly those who lost everything, millions of other Angelenos have been touched by these sudden and terrifying events in very profound and myriad ways. The impacts cut across geographic, economic, and racial lines. And in short, the events of early January can only be described as a shared trauma across our entire region. So we listed 6 impacts that the fire may have had on our respondents, and we asked them to tell us whether they applied to them. And if they answered in the affirmative, then we asked them, were you affected a great deal or just a little bit? I'm going to cite the responses and focus on the percentages of those who said they were impacted a great deal, because those are the ones who were impacted a great deal. 41%, and this is on this slide, 41% of our sample told us that they knew someone who lost their home or business. Now, I said there's 7.7 million adults in LA County. 41% means there are about 3.1 million people who live in this county, adults, who knew somebody who lost their home or business. That's a stunning number, almost unbelievable, but it's accurate. It's reasonably accurate. 25% said they were concerned that they themselves might have to evacuate their home. This applied to them a great deal. These are the people who said that they really were concerned that they were going to be evacuated. Now, we say to ourselves, how could that be? Well, first of all, they're the people who were evacuated, so they count in that figure. But there were, if I had a map of the county, as you heard described already, the fire kind of surrounded the city of LA, at least on 3 sides, and then on Altadena on 3 sides. And what was the significance of that? That the areas that were adjacent to these fires, like those of you who know LA at all, or Southern California, the city is basically two halves. One is on the south side of the Hollywood Hills, and one's on the north side of the Hollywood Hills, which is the San Fernando Valley. The communities that were on the southern end of the San Fernando Valley, or on the north side of the fire front, were all warned that they might have to evacuate. The people who lived in Sunland, Tujunga, which is in the northeast part of San Fernando Valley, which had one of the smaller fires, nonetheless a fire, were warned that they might have to be evacuated. No question that in the area of surrounding Altadena, in Pasadena and Verdugo Hills, which is in the city of Los Angeles, all those areas were warned you may have to be evacuated. And then there are people who thought that even if they weren't warned, that they were seeing what was going on, that they might want to just as a precautionary measure get the hell out of their homes and take whatever they could get out of their homes. UCLA, which is where I now teach, or I used to teach, but I'm still doing the survey. UCLA, which is in Westwood, 3 miles, 2.5 to 3 miles from the eastern front of the Palisades fire, shut down in the first week of classes in January because of the fire. And they were this close to having their dormitories evacuated. People were moving into their dormitories at the time that the fire broke out. And people who live in Westwood, which is the community that UCLA sits in, but it's a much broader community, that area was warned you may have to evacuate. So 25% of the people, of the adults we surveyed, said that they were concerned that they were going to have to be evacuated. They're very much concerned about it. 14% told us that they lost income because they either lost their job or they were forced to work less. That's the equivalent of a little more than 1 million people, 1 million adults in this county who said they lost some portion of their income as a result of the fires. And 27% of the people who lost income only had part-time jobs to begin with. So think about the economic impact that had. And again, when you start to think about it, at first it's not credible, not believable. Gardeners who had clients in the Pacific Palisades or Altadena, no more. People who were domestics who were cleaning people's homes, no more if the homes were destroyed. People who had jobs that they were doing on people's homes, those homes don't exist, they lost a client. So that's a huge number, 14%, 1 million people in the county who lost their job or had their income decline as a result of, or reduced as a result of the fire. And then if you go to the next slide here, I think that 28% said they took steps to be better prepared for a future emergency. I mean, because the footprint of this fire, the secondary footprint was so broad that there really wasn't anybody who wasn't in some way impacted by these fires, that they started thinking more seriously about resilience, about protection, about prevention, and things of that sort. And 32% of the people we surveyed wore a mask to avoid pollution caused by the massive clouds of smoke that covered a large portion of the LA basin. I was one of them. The fires generally, for those of you who are from out of town, start in the northeast and the winds blow from northeast to the southwest. The Altadena fires blew the smoke right over the neighborhood I live in a broader area than I live in the central part of Los Angeles. It looked like a solar eclipse. Birds stopped chirping. It was so dark in the middle of the morning. And the pollution was palpable. So, yeah, 32% of the people, 1/3 of the people, of the adults in LA County, probably their kids too, wore a mask to protect themselves. And finally, 22% say they volunteered or donated in the fire effort and the fire aftermath, which is pretty significant. We asked another question. If I can just get to this, sorry about that. On the issue of rebuilding, we asked the following question. In the case of houses that have suffered damage from the recent wildfires, do you agree or disagree that homeowners should be allowed to rebuild at the same location? 89% said yes. That they agreed, 8% disagreed. That's as close to unanimity as one can get in a public opinion survey. And then we asked that same question back in 2019 after the Woolsey fire, which was a major fire in those days, not as major as this one, that was in Malibu in the western Santa Monica Mountains. And at that time, 76% of the county residents said they agreed that homeowners should be allowed to rebuild, and now it's at 89%. Both of them are pretty overwhelming. What I don't have on the slide is we then asked the following question, a question of, well, if we're going to, separate and apart from the people who will need to rebuild, should homes be allowed in wildfire areas, hazard areas that have been heretofore undeveloped? And I don't have the figures here. I tried to dig them up yesterday because we didn't ask it this year, but we asked it back in 2019. Overwhelming percentage of people say no. Rebuild, yes. New stuff, you're just setting yourself up for disaster. People are not as dumb as politicians often give them credit for being. People have a very good sense of common sense, and I found that sometimes the easy way and sometimes the hard way, and I think people have it's good to listen to people and what they have to say. And we still have a lot of areas in the county of Los Angeles that are ripe for development, and that's going to be an issue. By the way, one of the things, this goes back to resilience, many of the properties that burned, both in Altadena and in the Palisades, I know the Palisades very well because I represented it for 20 years. Many of the homes had wood siding on them. Forget the wood shake roofs, which some of them still had. I think they had to replace them by law, but some still had them. But the wood siding was there. It was kindling for the fire once the fire came in with 100-mile-an-hour accelerant behind it. The homes on the Pacific Palisades, correct me if I'm wrong, but the areas that were really hurt, were really damaged and destroyed, were the areas on the southern part or the eastern part of the PCH, which was what I call the Lower East Side of Malibu. Not the big mansions, although some of the big mansions took it, bit the dust. But the ones that are on the southern, or the LA side, towards LA side of Pacific Coast Highway, were really small units that had very little side yard separation. That once the fire hit those homes, with the wind velocities being what they were, there was no stopping it. I often wondered, because I represented the Santa Monica Mountains, the western part of LA County, where half the fires that we have in LA County, wildfires, were in my district. We say we have 4 seasons in Los Angeles, 3 seasons, fire, flood, and earthquakes. Civil unrest is often the 4th season. I often asked our fire chief, the greatest fire chief, no offense, Chief Nig, P. Michael Freeman, who you probably knew, I asked him, why don't the fires that start in the northeast and move, they always end up at the ocean, but they never jump, most of them never jump PCH. And he says, it's just good firefighting. First of all, the fires weren't 100 miles an hour. The winds weren't 100 miles an hour, and they were able to put a fire line and use PCH as a fire break. This time it didn't work. A real tragedy. So, and the last thing on my slides, this is more interesting to a politician than it is to geotechnical experts, but maybe not. Maybe I'm not right about that. Wanted to know, in the midst of this fire, what was the appetite on the part of the voters of, these aren't just voters, but most of them are. Most of the adults are registered to vote. What was the appetite for raising taxes to increase the fire service, to buy more equipment, to, the whole 9 yards, to have a better response? And I was somewhat surprised that the results were as anemic as they were. We'll see. There's going to be a measure on the ballot I believe in either June or November. I don't know which, but there's a petition, an initiative petition being circulated in the city of LA for that purpose. Those who are very willing to assess themselves a tax, and we didn't tell them how much a tax would be, we just wanted a generic response, was only 11%. And 41% said they were somewhat willing, which is not a vote of confidence in the tax increase. So a total of 52% said they were either very willing or somewhat willing, and 46% said they were either very or somewhat unwilling. And the very unwilling, not willing at all, was 28%. So if you start with the 28% people who just don't want to hear about another tax increase, even for something as meaningful as this, it's going to be an uphill battle. So we'll see what happens. That was right after the fire. You'd think that would be the best time to go. I just want to take a minute to talk about governance, which is what I was asked to really address, but I wanted to share this information with you, and I hope it's helpful. I want to tell you a quick story. It's a true story. Back in 1983, Queen Elizabeth of England was in Los Angeles on an official visit with her husband, Prince Philip. And they came to LA, they spoke at the city, she spoke at the city council, and there was this big luncheon at the music center, county music center, big banquet for the two of them. And there was a reception before the banquet, and everyone was trying to get a picture with the Queen, and nobody was paying attention to Prince Philip. And I saw it out of the corner of my eye that he was standing on the side by himself. So I turned to two of my colleagues and I said, let's go keep the Duke of Edinburgh company. And so went over there, and I said, I'm Councilman Yaroslavsky, he's Councilman Wax, Councilman Bernson. And he said, peering over his glasses, he says, well, I've met the mayor, and I know who he is. And I know the supervisors, though I don't know what they supervise. And now I meet you councilors. I don't understand the system of your government. So we told him, he gave him a tutorial for 2 minutes about the state-local government relationship, that there are 58 counties in California. Los Angeles is the biggest one, but it's only one. There are 57 others. And that LA County has 88 cities within it. The city of LA is the biggest one, but it's only one of 88. There are 87 others. And we have several dozen school districts, a bunch of water districts, a flood control district, a air pollution control district, air quality management district, and of course the Metropolitan Transit Authority and the all-important mosquito abatement district. At which point he peered over his glasses and he said, I think I now understand the genius of your system. And I said, really? What is it? He says, it's designed not to govern. And he was in part right. He was known for a sense of humor, but there was a reason that the Constitution back in the early 1900s was structured this way, and I won't give you that lecture. But we have a fractured, dispersed governance structure in this region. And did you guys do any work with the County Public Works in the Palisades? Did they bring you in? Good thinking for them. That doesn't always happen. But we have, when there's a major fire, the fire departments basically leave their emblems on the outside. They come in unified command. They fight it together. One person's in charge, and they're able to really attack it quickly. P. Michael Freeman, the former county fire chief, used to say that when a fire breaks out, you have to attack it with overwhelming force. Something I've never forgotten. Because once it gets going, it's much more difficult to deal with it. And Now, again, these fires have to be viewed in the context of winds that were unprecedented in this county. I don't think we ever had 100-mile-an-hour winds and a brush fire at the same time. So a lot of the criticisms that have been made about people and about agencies, it almost didn't matter with 100-mile-an-hour winds, and the county fire chief said as much. But not all fires most of the fires are 40, 50-mile-an-hour winds. Sometimes it gusts up to 60 miles an hour. You can fly helicopters in that kind of a windstorm. You can't do it at 100 mile. We have an Air Force. The county has an Air Force. The city has an Air Force. Helicopters. We have people who come in with a super scooper from Canada. We have a contract with them. If they can't fly because of the high winds, that's what got this fire going to the point where it was at a point of no return. The governance issue for our region, and I'm sure this is the case in other parts of the country, I just don't know the other parts of the country as well. We don't have unified command generally on everything. Every city of the 88 cities has its own Department of Public Works, or they contract with the county for their public works. Most of them have their own fire departments, or they contract with the county fire department for their own fire. About half of them contract with the county, and the rest have their own fire department. Half of them have their own police department, the other half contract with the sheriff's department. They don't even operate as efficiently on one communication system as we would like to see that happen. At least in my day, we were trying to figure out a way everyone could communicate with one another. The one thing that has been mentioned here today was the emergency information system, the alert system, didn't work. It didn't work the way it's supposed to work. And I'm pretty upset about it because back in 2017, after I was out of office, I got a message on my iPhone saying, this is a test, we're just testing for people in the 90049 zip code. That's Brentwood, 10 miles from my house. So I called the mayor, Mayor Garcetti, and I said, hey, you got to this is a mistake. I'm in the 90036 zip code. And they got on it. He told me he was going to get on it. And then when this fire broke out, everybody got an alert, right? Better everybody get an alert than people not getting an alert, but nobody knew what was going on. There's something, and that's the county emergency operations center, but it's partnered with the city and maybe some of the other major cities. The key to these things is, if I could just close with this, is there needs to be, in an emergency situation, not just on paper, but in reality, a collaborative apparatus. And the way you do that is you practice it, right? You exercise it. I know we did that in public health when we were threatened with epidemics and pandemics and viruses and stuff long before COVID. We did exercises, how you respond, where you respond. John Wooden, the great UCLA basketball coach, I always quote him wherever I go. He had an old saying. He said, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. You've got to go through the motions like it's the real thing, so that when you do have the real thing, you're not running around trying to figure out what you're doing. I think that's one of the lessons of this set of fires. Again, it was on a scale that nobody ever had before. Even the unified command, when you have two major fires, where do you go? The county usually would back up the city, or the city would back up the county, but when there are two major fires, one in the city and one in the county territory, it creates a problem. The Bel Air fire of 1961, which was the Pearl Harbor of the LA City Fire Department, fire hydrants didn't work, nothing worked, and several hundred homes were burned down, not 15,000 or 16,000, just 400 or 500. But all of the assumptions upon which the LA City Fire Department operated were reassessed, and as they now reassess virtually after every fire. And this one makes the Bel Air fire, of course, look like a walk in the park. A lot of challenges to go, and the one thing that's going to happen in the county in the next 3 years is that the voters last year voted to create an elected county executive, an elected county mayor. Some of you come from areas where you have elected county executives. We don't. We have a board of supervisors. I was one of them, that governs committee of 5 that governs like an executive, that had to change, and hopefully that will change some of the culture countywide as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, so this is your opportunity now to ask any questions that you may have with regards to what you've heard. And Brian is walking around with a mic. Hey, Jonathan.
Thank you for an excellent set of talks. Really enjoyed it and learned a lot. I have a question about rebuilding. And my question basically is there a tension between these two factors? The first is there's a strong desire to rebuild fast, especially if they're in the same footprint, which came up today. So let's get the permit as soon as possible and get moving. The second consideration is presumably we want to improve these structures for disaster resilience, fire obviously, but maybe other factors as well, improved earthquake standards and things like that. So is there a tension there that maybe, you know, requiring these disaster resilience measures slows things down, and that is getting resistance? So I wonder, you know, is that tension there, and how are you dealing with that?
I think, William, did you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah. From my division standpoint, we don't get too involved in the specifics of what you're asking. The current direction, at least from the public works standpoint, is really looking at expedient rebuilding. I think on the building and safety front, there are definitely discussions, especially in the upcoming code update, as to what kind of measures can be improved and enhanced, of whether it's building construction materials that could improve the resiliency of buildings. But that's just one aspect. I think maybe, Chris, you've talked about the setbacks and some of the zones that were being created that could play a role into building resiliency and rebuilding.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'll speak more to fire code as opposed to building code or any of that. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about expediting processes. I'm not aware of in my travels in my various state groups of, you know, fire code being foregone or, you know, looked over in order to expedite rebuilding, at least related to that particular issue. Now, moving forward, one of the executive orders that came down from the governor during or after these fires was the expediting of the Zone 0 finalization, if you will, those regulations. Those were initially passed, I think, back in 21 to develop those regulations, and then they kind of just sat on it for a little while, and not surprisingly, because there's a whole lot of political pushback for that at the local level all the way up. And as we're seeing right now, as they're being finalized and getting ready to go to final review, they've been significantly watered down. What I've heard from a lot of my colleagues out there is we're frustrated as fire chiefs because are they really meeting what that original intent was now? And the LA area is one of the areas that was one of the most vocal in the process because, you know, you have a lot of people that live in high fire hazard areas with very, very expensive homes, and they like their ornate vegetation and decorations, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, that's kind of more of a political side of it, but, you know, for us in this professional capacity, it's been frustrating to see some of these, and it's not surprising. We see this time and time again after very large catastrophes happen where everybody's hyper-focused in the moment. Okay, how do we deal with this? How do we make sure we don't end up in this space again? Then as, you know, as time goes on, time shielding and distance, we kind of start to forget about that stuff and wind up in this space again, where I was part of a press conference actually almost immediately after those fires, not necessarily related to those fires, but with some of my other fire chief leadership colleagues, Western fire chiefs, Cal chiefs, league chiefs, where we very publicly said, we have got to start to go this other direction because this extreme fire behavior is becoming worse than we've ever seen it, and our ability to contend with it. As individual members of the community, you have to best set yourself up for success. Again, we're very good at what we do, but when it gets that bad, we can't be everywhere. So I guess the short answer to that is, in the immediate, I'm not seeing any type of leniency with current code and our ability, or, there's none of this free-for-all in the rebuilding, but some of those initial efforts in the very beginning to ensure more hardened infrastructure in these areas has subsided a little bit.
Add a little bit to this. I'm not there anymore, but historically, when some of the buildings that were burned, some of the homes that were burned, were built under an old code. So one of the first things that need to be done is to ensure that when the rebuild happens, that it's rebuilt to the current code. And you'll find people who will say, well, I like that wood siding. It gave that New England look, that Martha's Vineyard look. And it's just a matter of political will. And for me, it wasn't that difficult. I represented, when I was a city councilman, I only represented 250,000 people at that point. I represented the hills of Bel Air and Benedict Canyon and very Tony areas, very influential people. But brush clearance was essential. I mean, it's your life, not mine. I don't live in the hills. I can't afford to live where you're living, but it's your life. And by the way, also the lives of our first responders. So that's one thing. In the county, when I was there for 20 years, and I represented the Santa Monica Mountains, the unincorporated part of the county in the Santa Monica Mountains, we had absolutely no resistance. I mean, if we did, we ignored it, especially on brush clearance. That is the biggest deal. And after you have a brush fire, wildfire, I think you'll back me up on this, you can fly over and see homes that were not burned down when the fire came through, that were not burned down because they had appropriate fire clearance, brush clearance. And those that didn't have brush clearance were toast, no pun intended. The fact of the matter is that enforcement is critical, and then at the county, even at the county, we have resistance to enforcement. It's not cheap to clear brush. It comes out of your after-tax money, but if it's all a question of what's your life worth to you. So I don't know what's happening at in the rebuild in Atlanta, in Altadena. I sincerely hope that the city of LA is going to at least require them to build to the new fire codes and whatever additional things that I thought was in the governor's ED, but apparently.
And I'll just add, I mean, I'm no longer with Public Works, so I can say things that perhaps William may no longer be able to. And William, you can tell me if I don't know what I'm talking about. But I will tell you that the short answer is, yeah, there's a lot of tension. There is a lot of tension. The agencies feel a lot of pressure to approve these projects as quickly as possible, get people's back into their home, rebuilding their lives, whatnot, the greater good. I know that when I led the rebuilding efforts for Woolsey Fire, which again was just a fraction of what we're seeing now, initially the intent was to build back better, building to the current code and whatnot, better materials and whatnot. But at some point there was a certain pressure for staff to perhaps not necessarily enforce a wide enough roadway to provide fire access because there was just no terrain for you to do so, certain things like that. And maybe we haven't seen that yet because we're in the beginning stages of rebuilding, but maybe that may happen down the line.
And Rosanna, what I can also say is I think the difference in the fire we're dealing with now is at the county we're so used to the fires being mostly in the Malibu, Calabasas area. And here is the first time where it's impacted Altadena, a community that has been historically disadvantaged from a socioeconomic perspective. And so there inevitably is that tension with, how do you help rebuild a community that may not have the resources or the personal capital to achieve it on their own. So examples are residents that live in Altadena could have been multi-generational families that inherited their homes. So some of them didn't have a mortgage and chose not to have insurance because they weren't obligated by the bank to have it. And now this has happened to them and they have nowhere to go. And so there was a lot of the narrative certainly has changed, but there was definitely a lot of concerns from the political side about, well, will Altadena be changed forever, the character being changed forever, if a lot of current homeowners have no option but simply to sell to someone who has the ability to actually rebuild?
Right here.
Thank you for the presentations for this panel. So as you said, this is very unprecedented event and not contained only at the fire sites. For example, for the Palisades fire, the ash and soot traveled all the way to Culver City, even further. So it's not just the soil, I'm asking in terms of soil contamination. The effect is not just contained within the fire perimeter, but other parts of the city or county got affected. So do you envision a policy change or policy change in any near future after such events that public areas can be tested for soil contamination to like playgrounds, the beach? We still see ash in the Santa Monica beach in the playgrounds, the kids play in that sand. So how can this be incorporated in a policy that because we are going to have these events in the future as well, at least how can we ensure the peace of mind to the community?
That's a difficult question to answer. And as Zev pointed out earlier, there's a lot of different districts and jurisdictions that govern this matter. I can share with you just in our experience working with the question of testing for contaminants in soil, there was an interesting kind of back and forth as to which jurisdiction really has agency over these matters, whether is it beaches and harbor, if it's on the beach, is it air quality management district, if it pertains to air particle pollutants, is it the State Department of Toxic Substances and Control, is it LA County Public Health, is it LA County Public Works? And so I think the fire really put into perspective this need for what Zev also mentioned was, is there a unified collaborative framework for which various agencies can work together on and define sort of the role clarity during an emergency, what each agency is really responsible for, is something that definitely could be worked on, at least from a long-term policy perspective.
I have nothing to add. I agree.
Yes, Daniel.
Excellent presentations. You spoke a little bit about resources, and I would love if you could expand a little bit more. I remember after the Northridge earthquake, a lot of people who were underinsured, people who didn't have quote upgrade option as part of their earthquake insurance, renters who didn't have renters insurance. And I haven't seen any good statistics or any numbers on how we're dealing from that from the point of view of the resources needed to rebuild. Thank you very much.
I mean, I've dabbled a little bit, at least on the fire insurance side, only just because of the roles that I have up and down the state. But obviously, fire insurance has become a pretty contentious, hotly contested item over the last year, and not only availability but affordability of it. And even prior to the fires, you had the FAIR plan that was out there that was meant to try to pick up the shortcomings of your standard private insurance companies. Whereas a lot of insurance companies were pulling out of California. In my role as president of League of Cities Fire Chiefs, we met regularly with the state commissioner's office, insurance commissioner's office, to try and be a part of that conversation, because initially the subject matter experts, us as fire chiefs, weren't really involved in those conversations, to ensure that communities' efforts, whether it's county level or local level, that those efforts were being taken into account by kind of forcing those insurance companies to make sure that they were offering premiums at affordable price. What I can tell you is this: the insurance industry is in a really bad spot right now. And I couldn't even begin to speak to what that looks like as far as sustainability goes with insurance, but I know that it's being real time right now debated and worked through to see what that looks like for California moving forward.
And from the county side, I think there's no really one single silver bullet solution to this. So there's been a multitude of angles as to how what role government can really play in assisting in rebuild. So I did mention earlier that the Board of Supervisors made a motion to waive all fees for those who are rebuilding, as long as it was owner occupied. So you're the current property owner at the time of the fires. If you chose to rebuild, your fees would be waived. So that was one way of assisting the cost of the rebuild. He mentioned fire insurance. That kind of came into play when it came to the discussion about the fire debris removal process, especially for those who opted out of the Army Corps' offer to clear. They had their own tension with their insurance companies as to what insurance would cover if they chose to do it on their own. I think some homeowners thought that they could move faster than the Army Corps. There was some distrust of what they would do when they kind of came in and offered to basically clear things en masse. I'll finish with this point. I didn't mention in my presentation, but something that doesn't get talked often about is the role of FEMA reimbursements, specifically for state and local agencies. And one of the ongoing points of contention right now is the changing relationship of the federal administration with respect to how state and local jurisdictions are able to pay and respond to emergency efforts. And so one of the things that's really important to public works is our ability to track costs, to really find ways to seek reimbursement, because the trend that's happening now is that it's getting harder and harder to do it compared to the way we've worked with FEMA in years before. So that's another hurdle that's added on top of the technical challenges that we're faced. There's also a very large administrative challenge that our many departments are facing. This is not just public works, this is local and state government.
He's touching on really kind of the initial cusp of emergency management holistically, right? And that's part of that broader cost recovery animal, if you would be, that's out there. Like Zeb spoke about, when you have agency, regardless of whether it's a multi-jurisdictional response or not, typically when you have a large-scale disaster, you have emergency operations centers that are involved, emergency operations plans that are enacted, et cetera, and thus begins the super complex, comprehensive process of operational periods and documenting all these different things and people serving in their kind of ancillary roles within the emergency operations centers, et cetera. But it's a very complex process that he had mentioned related to FEMA and ensuring some of that will help small business owners, as we've seen, and local residents. Even in my city, when we had some of the big windstorms that came through, Cal OES came through and said, hey, anybody have trees fall in their houses? So there are programs that are out there that if the jurisdiction is paying attention and on their game, which typically the LA County, LA City area is, they're offering that assistance that's out there, but then again, that's separate from that kind of that private insurance safety net, if you will. From my perspective, typically at the federal government, I'll let you, it's probably more of your world than mine, but usually the federal government, kind of regardless of politics, when stuff's really bad, they're gonna step in and offer up the funds accordingly. To me, in this role as a fire chief, that's not usually the concern. Usually that money's going to be there for us to not only cost recover all the things that we're doing operationally from an emergency response standpoint, but then even in some respect help out the actual community, whether it's businesses or homeowners, et cetera. The private insurance side of it is, again, a whole nother animal that I think is really I know is really struggling right now. But.
Yeah, I think the federal government issue is a real issue. The local governments, as I imagine the state as well, has always been able to count on the federal government to reimburse them for a significant, if not an overwhelming majority of the costs incurred because of a natural disaster. That is not an assumption that anybody can make right now in local government. Now, they haven't cut us, I shouldn't say us, they haven't cut local government loose yet, but they haven't laid the groundwork for, they haven't been flooding the zone with resources with which to compensate the local governments for the cost. Fire service, for public works, for everybody, law enforcement, the costs that were incurred during the course of these disasters. It's just unthinkable to me. If you recall, earlier this year, there was, the President of the United States actually, when he came out here, warned that he, you know, that somehow it was discretionary whether that we're going to reimburse, and the rationale was given that we're going to get rid of FEMA and turn all of FEMA's responsibilities over to the state and let the states work it out with you guys. In the meantime, the county budget is underwater big time. The city budget is underwater big time. But other states which have had disasters somehow have gotten reimbursed very quickly. This is a new ballgame for everybody in local government, local and state government, and it's not healthy. And I'm not being political. This is just common sense. A disaster is a disaster. The irony is that Palisades is a reasonably Republican area, and to the extent that the federal government screws Palisades and the city's response to Palisades, those are his folks that are being hurt, and it should never be that. Disaster should never, politics should never be a factor in how you respond to a disaster. A disaster is a disaster, and we all get behind the community that's been impacted.
And while we'll close with this because we're at 1 minute now, but you know, the fact that FEMA may go away, chances are that that won't happen. But there is a bill right now in D.C., the FEMA Act of 2025, Bill 4669, which is looking to restructure FEMA and push down a lot of the responsibilities that FEMA currently has onto the state and local agencies. And so, you know, it's just going to get worse than
if the Congress ever comes back into
right, if Congress ever gets back. Okay, so with that, I think I'm going to pass it. Naveed, do I pass it to you, or? Okay, we're going to pass it on to Brad. I want to thank you all for being here. If you have any additional questions, I'm sure our speakers will be lingering nearby, and you can tackle them in the hallway. Thank you very much for attending our session.
It's really gratifying to me as somebody who was in public policy for so long that we have these kind of sessions at Geo-Extreme. I think this is one of the things that makes this such a cool event. So I hope everybody enjoyed this. It was really interesting to me. I also want to say to Zev, I worked for the British government for like 8 years before I came to ASCE, and we always got nervous anytime we put any member of the royal family in any kind of public situation. But Prince Philip was like in his own category. I should not be saying this on the live stream. It was a clear the track situation. You had no idea what was going to happen when that guy got up in front of a crowd. So, well done. We do have some announcements before we get to the exhibit break. And some of them are the same as this morning, but you should listen to them again. Everybody has access to the full conference proceedings. If you don't have your card yet, or you haven't scanned the QR code, you can do that in the ASCE booth or up at the registration desk. They will hook you up. PDH forms are also up there. That's important. And you're going to get an email in about 4 weeks where you will go in and you will check off all the sessions that you attended, and it will make you a magic certificate that says you earned whatever your number of PDHs was, and you can print it out and hang it on your wall, I guess, or keep it in a file somewhere when you submit. We do want to say thanks to all the exhibitors and sponsors. This is really how we pay for stuff, guys. Everybody always thinks, oh, we had 18 million registrants for this conference. We must be rolling in it. We don't make very much money off of people registering for the conference. We need the exhibitors and sponsors. So please go visit them at the break and tell them thank you for what they did to support the event. Also, while you're there, I've got Ralph up here with me. You can make your contribution to GI student programs. $96 or more gets you a Ralph Peck bobblehead. And if we run out, which is probably going to happen, we'll mail it to you. So that is an option. We have other stuff too. We have the original GI logo t-shirts. Those are $30. We have like the quarter zip things. Those are a $250 donation. Or if you got $1 million you want to donate, we'll help you figure that out. Tonight, we had a swan boat thing. We had a Surrey bike thing. Apparently that is blowing up, and it may not happen. We may be changing the plans, and it may be that we're just going to run a tab at a bar, and everybody goes and drinks for free for a while, and then it goes to cash bar. Please pay attention. We will make an announcement about this on where it's going to be if you want to drink for free and you probably do, will tell you about it. Before we go, I want to acknowledge a couple of people who are not with us today. Within the past year, we lost 2 individuals who were part of this community, not just the geotech community, but specifically the extreme events community. That's Jim Hansen and Juan Pestana. Jim was super active in GI. A lot of people knew him for his work with the Journal, or with the Geo-Environmental Committee, or with the International Activities Committee. Jim was the International Activities Committee for a long time, and that's a lot of work, focusing and coordinating all of GI's activity into our various international events, and we really miss him a lot. And Juan passed away sadly just a few weeks ago. Juan was kind of everything, right? Somebody said, well, what was Juan an expert in? And I was like, well, kind of everything. Earthquakes, numerical modeling, but really what I will always remember about Juan is he was maybe our smartest member. We have a lot of smart members, guys. And Juan was brilliant. And I picked this picture because he wasn't smiling in it. Because every time I saw him, and every other photo I ever saw of him, he was smiling. So this was in the Mercury News in San Jose like 25 or 30 years ago. And so I thought I'll put that one up. So I just wanted to remember Jim and Juan as we're here this week, because they were a really, really big part of our community. And that's it. Exhibit break is next, and we'll be back in here in a half hour, and concurrent sessions as well. Thanks.